All right, so today I want to talk about the OpenWeatherMap API. Now, this is a collection of APIs all about weather, current weather, historical weather, things like that. And there is a free version of this. So the pricing that's available through openweathermap.org, you can sign up for a free API key, and you can see there's a long list of potential APIs that you can call on. There's limitations to calling those things, but still, I mean, 50 calls per minute, 1 million calls per month, that's pretty good for a free API key. And then as the price goes up, you get more and more access, more and more calls. There's different endpoints that you have access to, and so on. There's also one that I'm going to be using today called the Onecall Api. Now, this gives you sort of a selection of a whole bunch of different bits of data. So weather by the hour, weather by the minute, weather by the day, icons, all the stuff that you would really want if you were building a simple weather site like this. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taking a latitude and longitude value, and when I click on this button, I'm going to create 3 cards. This is sort of my template, what it's going to look like. I'm going to create 3 of these using the data that comes back from the API call, and I've even added in here so you can click on a button, get your current location, and then use that and get the weather for that. If you're looking for a copy of the code, link to it is down in the description. Take you to the code gist with all the code that I'm using here. Now, the free API, the calls to Onecall API, there's a slightly different number. For the free, it's 1,000 per day. For the startup version, it's 2,000 per day. If you are a student, though, there's a special notation that they've got down here. If you are a student, you can get 6 months free access to the developer version. So you get access to some extra APIs, and you get a lot more calls per day, per minute, per month, and so on. Okay, so we're going to be looking at using this. When you register on the site, create an account, you will be given a default key, but you can create as many as you want. So simple as coming in here, generate the key. There we go. Asks you to verify. I've created this. I've created a key specifically for this video. After I'm done the video, I'll be deleting it, so you will have to register for your own key to actually make this work. But once you have the key, then you're good to go. Okay, so let's jump in here and take a look and see how this is put together. Now, right now, it's not actually getting the data or doing anything with it, but I've got the basic page set up. So I've used Bootstrap CSS. So I've got Bootstrap linked to inside of here, just to save me having to write CSS. In the top section of the page, I've got a nav area, and this is where I've got the form controls. So there's one called latitude, there's one called longitude. Those are going to be the 2 numbers that we have. I have hard-coded in here a couple of values just to have something there instead of me having to type it every time. Normally, I would not put a hard-coded value in here. I would just leave it blank and let the user put something in there. And then we've got the 2 buttons, button get, button current, and we're going to use these 2. When the page loads, we're going to add click listeners to those and have this one actually call the API. Use current location is going to use geolocation built into the browser to get the current latitude and longitude, and then put that into the form so that when you click this button, you'll be getting the weather for the current location. Okay, and then inside the main part, I have here, this is going to be my template. You can see I've got a div with the class call, so it's going to be a column, and then I have a card here. I've hard-coded 30% of the viewport width, just so it shows up the way it will when we're done. But this is going to be my template for all of the data that comes back from the server. So there's an H5 tag, which is going to be the current date, an image, which is going to be the icon coming from the Weather API, and then these are all the different things that we're going to display. So the weather label, is it sunny, is it cloudy? High temperature, low temperature, the high temperature feels like, the current pressure, humidity, UV index, precipitation. Actually, we can scrap that little bit right there. So UV index, precipitation, the dew point, wind speed and direction, sunrise, sunset, and there's more available as well. We're going to be making a call to the Onecall API, getting a whole bunch of data back, going to the daily section, and then extracting all of this data and turning it into our HTML. Down in the bottom, I've got the examples for the 3 different icons that we can get back. So if I scroll down here, we can see there's this version, or the 2x version, or the 4x version. So there's 3 versions of every one of these icons. And I think I've got it up here. One of these is my icons. There we go. So I'll put these links as well in the description for you so you can look at the icons. What we're getting is a section inside the data that's coming back. Let me zoom in a little bit on this for you. There's a section called weather, and inside of that is an array, and it's an array of objects. Each one has an ID, which is a specific type of weather, and the list of all the different values is down here. So the 200s, the 300s, 4, 5, 6, 7, 800, and each one of these numbers references sort of a title and a description, main and description. These are the properties that we'll get. And then there's an icon associated with that, and there's 2 icons, D and N, day and night. So back up here to the top in this icon list, here's all the different icons that are available, and you can see every one of them has a D and an N, so a day and a night version of that. Not every one of them is different, but ones where you've got the sun, you will see the difference there. Okay, so let's actually get into building this thing. Oh, I'll also include the link to the Bootstrap site. I'll link to the cards page so you can see the HTML that I'm using for that. All right, so let's jump back into our code and actually go into the JavaScript. I have a namespace object called app. Inside of that is just a series of functions. My init function, this is the one that gets called right away. So when the page loads, I'm calling app.init. Inside my initialization function, all I'm doing is adding click listeners. If you call the get button or click on the get button, I'm going to call my fetch weather function. If you click on the current button, I'm going to call my get location function. So get location, this one's already done. All I'm doing, I've got some default values to pass in as my option. I'm calling the browser built-in geolocation get current position method. I've got a video on that if you're looking for that. There's a link up there at the top to talk about geolocation. My success and my failure functions are right here. The failure, all I'm doing is writing out in the console that there was an error. And for success, I'm going to fill in my form. So the latitude and longitude inputs in the form, I'm going to take the position object that comes back from geolocation, go into the coordinates, get the latitude and the longitude, and I'm putting it to 2 decimal places. So that's the value that I'm putting inside of there. Okay, so that's it for geolocation. There's nothing really different or fancy about that. I'm just getting the position and putting it in the form. That's it. All right, now the API. This is the fetch weather. And when fetch weather is successful, I'm going to call show weather to actually build the HTML. So we're going to be doing most of our work in these 2 functions. Inside fetch weather, I am going to get the values from the latitude and longitude. Those are the 2 inputs. This is my current key. You'll have to replace that because that's the key that's going to be gone after this video. Language. You can choose a language, you want Swedish or Russian or French or German. You can put the language right here. Units, we can do standard, which means temperatures are going to be in Kelvin. You can say imperial, or you can say metric. Then the URL, so here's the base URL. We've got api.openweathermap.org, data, 2.5 is the version, and this is the API. So there's a whole bunch of those APIs. There's the geolocation one, geocoding one, weather, hourly, daily. There's a whole bunch of different ones. We're using that one call. And then we need to, inside of here, put all of these parameters that we want to pass to the call so we get back the appropriate weather. All right, so let's fill out this string. We're going to need latitude. We're going to need the longitude. So there's a lat and a long. We're going to need our actual API key, and that parameter is called app ID. I'm going to put in units, and I'm going to put in a language code as well. So these are the different values. And since this is inside of a template string, it means I can do this. I can just insert my variables for all of these things like this. Okay, my latitude, I've got lat, long, and key. So lat is my variable for this, long is my variable for the longitude, key is my variable for the app ID, lang and units, right here, lang and units. Okay, so we have now the URL that we need. Now I'm going to use just the basic fetch. So the browser fetch call to make the call to the API. I'm going to do the standard chain of methods here. So for promises, you can add the then on the end. Fetch is promise based. So this is going to give us back a response object. My response object, I'm going to check to see if that actually came back with something I can use. So I don't want a 404 response. I don't want a 500 error or something like that. So if resp.ok, so there's a property that tells us that the response that came back was all good. If it's not, so the exclamation mark here tells me this wasn't okay, then I'm going to throw an error. So throw new error, and I'm going to put the response.status text inside of there. That means when I throw an error, it's going to come down to the catch. It'll be handled by this. So whatever the status text for the error was, it's going to be written out in my console. Now, typically, if you're building a production site, you're going to actually give this information to the user. For this demo, I'm just leaving it in the console. All right, if that worked, then what came back was a JSON file. I'm going to need to extract the JSON from my response. So we're going to say return resp.json. This will generate a promise as well, which will come down to here, the then, and then I can take my JSON data, call this resp, call it data, whatever you want to call it. And inside of here, I have to decide what I want to do. Now, I could build the HTML right here, but what I'm going to do, just to keep each of my functions small and easier to read, I'm going to actually just call my app.showWeather function, and I will pass the data down to that. All right, going down to our showWeather function, I'm taking this data and I'm going to write it out to the console, and I'm finding weather row. That is here inside of my main area. I have a div with the class weather and the class row. So I'm looking for the div that has both of those classes. If I do, I'm going to replace all of this HTML right here with the stuff that we're going to build. So right now, let's copy all of that. There we go. I've taken that from the web page. And inside of here, what we're going to do, I'm just going to put it inside of a variable for right now, like this. Okay, so I have a variable which contains a template string, which is all of this. That's what we're going to build. right now, we're just going to write out to the console. So we're going to check this out. This should be working right now. In my console, when I click Get Weather, I should get the response back from the server. And there it is. So if we open this up, this is all the data that's coming back from the server. Now, what I've done is I've taken from their website an example response, just so we can see some data. It's a little easier to understand here. I'm zoomed in a little bit more. So latitude and longitude. We've got a section called current. This is the current weather right now. So if all I wanted to show was the current weather, this is what the current weather API would be returning, is something like what's inside of current. There's a minutely section at the same level as current. This gives you the weather minute by minute for the next 60 minutes. There's an hourly section that'll give you 48 hours worth of weather, so once an hour for the next 48 hours. And every one of these sections, they all have a DT. This is a date time. It's a timestamp based on the number of seconds since the Unix epoch. JavaScript timestamps work on milliseconds, not seconds. So any value that you get here coming back from the API, you'll have to multiply by 1,000 to be able to use it in your script. So we've got hourly and then daily. And this is the one that I'm going to use. So these are all at the same level up at the top. We can see here current, daily, hourly, minutely. I'm going to be using the daily one. And inside the daily one, there's my timestamp. But I've got sunrise, sunset. There's also moonrise, moonset, moon phase. Temperature ranges for the day. Feels like. So I'm going to be taking out the min and max here. And you can see these temperatures look a little bit odd, and that's because they're using standard, which is Kelvin. So in this example from their website, they weren't using imperial or metric, they were using standard. So these are in degrees Kelvin. If I were to open up mine right here, and I go inside of the temp section, we can see I used metric as my units. So the values in here, there's 27, 25, 27, 18. These are in Celsius. So we want to be able to take this data and build 3 cards. Now, one other thing worth noting here, I have 8 days worth of weather in the daily section. I only want 3. I want 3 cards. I want today and the next 2 days. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loop through this, but I'm only going to go as far as number 2. All right, let's jump back in here to go back into our script. So this worked. We got the data. We have the row. Now, what I want to do is I need to clear out the old stuff and replace it with the new. So I could say row.innerHTML equals this. No problem. That will clear out the old HTML, and then we can replace it with our new. But I'm just going to completely replace it. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to say that row.innerHTML, here, may as well leave this in here but comment it out. So we could do this. I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to say the stuff that came back here in this response, that's all of this right here. Let's expand this a little bit. So this whole thing, this is my response object. Response.daily is giving me the array that I'm going to loop through. So I can say response.daily. That's the array of the 8 values here. I'm going to use the map method. This allows me to loop through it, and I will return one thing for each of those. So I'm going to return a little piece of HTML for each of these. But I still have an array. It's going to be an array of strings. So we call join at the end. Can just leave it as that, just leave it as a empty string, or you can put a space in between if you want. But we're taking the 8 values, or in our case, it's going to be 3 values. join them all together. So this will create one string, which then becomes the inner HTML. Okay, inside of the map, we're going to have a day. Each one of these things is going to be a day. So this will loop 8 times, and we're going to return something. Here, let's just do this to begin with, just to see that it's working. So I'm going to loop through the 8 things that are returned, and I'm going to create 8 paragraphs with the word day inside of them. There we go. 8 paragraphs with the word day. So we want to do this, but we want to make cards instead of paragraphs, and we only want to do 3 of them. To limit the number is easy enough. The map method gives us an index number, and then I'm going to say if the index is less than or equal to 2, so 0, 1, 2, then we will return that. So this should give us 3 paragraphs. There we are, 1, 2, 3. Great. Now instead of returning this, don't want that, I want this thing, our template string. So we'll put this right here as the return value, and then we'll get rid of this thing at the bottom. All right, so we're going to return 3 copies of our template, 3 copies of that card. There we go. Now, I'm going to get rid of that 30% that was in there. I don't want this style 30% because that's going to mess up my CSS. I'm just going to use the card. There we go. 3 cards. They're all the template, but because it's a template string, I can now inject the variables, just like we were doing right up here. We're going to inject the variables that we want right here. So I'm just going to, I've got a copy of this, I'm just going to paste this in here, and then I'll point out the different things that I've done. All right, and there we go. So I'm taking from the day, I'm going to get the DT. This is the timestamp, multiplied by 1,000. And that's going to give us the JavaScript timestamp that I can pass in here. So this is the current date and time. I'm going to take that and I'm going to paste it as my title right here. So I'm going to use the built-in method toDateString. It's going to give me the date as a string. Then for my image tag, here's the string for every one of the icons. And then I'm just going to paste in here day, weather, and weather was an array. Like if we look back here, here's weather. It is an array, so I'm just grabbing whatever the first thing is inside there. I'm going to grab the first one. I'm going to get the icon. There's the main and the description. So the icon, and I'm going to use the 4x size each time, and then I'm going to take the description, and that's going to be the alt text for my image. And day weather 0 main is going to be my title on the card. Temp max, temp min, day feels like day. There's also a day feels like night. So here's the feels like day, feels like night. We're just extracting each one of these values and then writing it out. Sunrise, sunset, those are date strings as well that I created up here. Multiply by 1,000 to get the JavaScript timestamp, and I'm going to extract the time string for these two. I want to know what time of day. For the date, it's the date part. I don't care about the time, it's just the date part that I want. For the sunset and sunrise, I want the time. Okay, so we can check that out now, get the weather, and there we are. So this is at that latitude and longitude. This is what we've got for the 30th, 31st, and 1st of September. Here we go. I can round off the precipitation here a little bit. I'm just basically multiplying whatever number came in by 100 to get this. And they're floating point numbers, which means sometimes you will get stuff like this if you don't convert it to fixed. So dew point temperatures, the wind speed and angle or direction, sunrise, sunset, these are the time strings. And up here at the top, these are the date strings. And then last thing to test is use current location. So we're going to get a different latitude and longitude coming in here. There we go. And now I get the weather with that one, and I get a different weather for Ottawa for these 3 days. And that's it. So, hope that all makes sense to you. Take some time. Check out the website. Go through some of these different APIs that they've got. Take a look at the different ones. They've got great documentation. It gives you examples for all of them. But they all work in the same sort of way. It's all about building the query string that has the correct parameters, making sure that you've got your API key inside of there, doing that as a fetch call, and once you've got the data back, then you access it and generate whatever HTML you want. All right, hope that helps you out. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. And as always, thanks for watching.